Cool, so to kick us off, who has a question for any of our panelists here?
I have a comment to make. That, I'm just, so many of our speakers have actually just spurred in my mind issues that are related to older people and how we can, in particular things like, older people in employment. That's an area for me to be thinking about, because as we get further into the AI world, people will need to be rethinking their place, their self-worth, their, what's their expertise. And I liked what you were talking about, and I'm thinking from my perspective of, older people are going to need to be thinking about working longer and where do they fit into the AI world.
I can remember being 22 and working for a government agency, and they had a whole floor of people that were unable to learn computers. And so they were just essentially waiting until they retired, or some people were literally getting terminal illnesses and dying there. And they had not done anything other than just put them in a kind of holding pattern and just given them quite sort of manual work to do. There'd been no sort of assessment, that idea of working as a clerk, which used to be a sort of manual and processing role. There'd been no kind of transition for them through into a digital world. It was like, maybe we sent them on a course and they couldn't learn the computer and that's it, now they're just going to stick here. And so I think that I think you raise a really good point, Heather, that people need to be thinking about how we're going to transition people, and it's unrealistic to think that people will just be able to automatically transition themselves. There's a responsibility, not just in organisations and in governments, but there's responsibilities us in community to make sure that we're not leaving those people behind. Yep. There's a really high percent of lack of digital natives. And there's a whole lot of people, which you raised in your talk as well, of people that don't even have access to devices or to computers. So how do they participate and be employed in a kind of emerging AI age?
Yeah. And the idea of self-worth that we've just been hearing about, I just feel so motivated myself, because I had a change in career was lumped on me not long ago, and I'm still somewhat thinking through my own self-worth because I've been connected to this thing for so long. So your presentation really made me feel really good about myself, as to what I need to do. Yeah.
Okay, so I think, Teo, there was an online question.
No, sorry. Design AI from dignity will amplify dignity, facilitating connection. Can the speaker explore or give an example of designing from dignity?
Did you hear that?
Okay. Designing from dignity recognizes that the human soul, the human spirit, needs to be celebrated. Remember, being truly seen, heard, understood is like I described, oxygen to the soul. If you recognize that design, then it forces you to, or rather it compels you to put the role of that person, which had been discussed earlier, that people are being put at the back seat of design as opposed to being at the forefront of design. I had a conversation with my co-chief strategy officer just today talking about designing with peer models in mind. Basically, keeping human beings at the background of managing the AI tool, but putting them at the forefront of the design of the AI tool. So it becomes an end-to-end experience. Remember, we said start with human self-worth and end with self-governance. it's basically is wrapped around humanity, and that is the essence of designing with dignity, where it celebrates and allows the uniqueness of each individual to shine through. It does that in a sense without the intuitive capacity, and therein lies the need for human intervention at the back end. So you put humans in front and you put humans behind, basically, so that AI remains where it should be, a tool for facilitation, a tool for scaling up, as opposed to a tool for delivering solutions.
I guess I had a kind of, sorry.
I had another question for, I'm sorry, I might be pronouncing your name wrong. Is it Modusi?
Yeah.
In my work, I don't do this role, but my organisation does peer support work for disabled people. So training disabled people to be peer supporters of other disabled people. So in your presentation, I just wasn't quite clear, were you advocating for AI tools to act as peer support workers, or for like peer supporters to use AI to enhance their peer support, or kind of what was the link in with peer support?
Okay, when it comes to the linkage with peer support, there are very few individuals, when you compare them with the scope of work that's being done within the medical and mental health field, there are very few individuals that actually identify as peers, and fewer still that are involved in peer work. The ability to scale, when you compare that with the results where interventions have taken place using peer support workers and the success of their facilitating the recovery journey, you see that we can only benefit if we scale up. However, the ability to scale up has to be driven with technology in some instances so that that scale can be spread. Unless and until, of course, we're able to be at capacity when it comes to providing a workforce, and that's the kind of work that we are very interested in. How do we retool the workforce? How do we upskill the workforce so that leveraging AI, we can deliver more services, we can improve efficiency with humans remaining behind and ahead of the curve.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions to come up? I guess I had one that I want to pose to Modupi first, but also then the rest of the panel, sort of things. Talking about designing with dignity, and obviously recognizing that in our current state, AI is not necessarily being designed with that in mind. To take like a pessimistic view of that, we're already in a state where artificial intelligence is being designed with things like inter-platforms and with ideas like engagement as their kind of like driving engagement as their kind of primary focus. Do you envision that a shift within AI, or is that, because the pessimistic take would be ChatGPT, the way Gemini, all these kind of products that are already backed and so heavily corporatized and heavily designed in certain ways, and obviously you look at Grok, for example, is being, you know, the driving force behind that is a white supremacist. So that sort of thing of, do you envision the landscape of AI changing in a way that does allow for design to be to a dignity in design? Or is it kind of a bit of a cat out of the bag situation? Like we were talked about in the kind of current theme that's kind of kept coming is the idea that we're kind of like, obviously behind, with governments, we're behind them up. We're constantly trying to chase that technology, and I guess, or chase the kind of frameworks, the regulatory frameworks. Is that, yeah, do you envision a shift within AI technology over the coming years, or as this technology develops, or is it kind of a bit of a cat out of the bag situation? We've already kind of lost the battle a little bit.
Thank you for that. Really good question. And I'm going to take it from the perspective of industry in general. Anytime there's new innovation, it will run ahead of people before we start saying, wait a minute, let's put some ethical guardrails in place. Whether it's in the extractive industry, oil, and all of that, we've seen it where the cat ran out of the bag. In banking, finance, the cat ran out of the bag, and then the guardrails come after. AI is no different, technology is no different. The internet came, we did the same. But the minute you have more, well, in fact, it's not the minute because it's right here, right now, right? We've seen the TikTok challenge when it came to, the ethical use of TikTok. We're seeing Mark Zuckerberg and all of them, it's a conveyor belt in courtrooms now. And conversations such as we're having right now, orchestrated by the initiatives of Change and Fecal Trust, are happening all over the world. People are challenging status quo. So yes, the cat may appear like it's run out of the bag, but no, it's not. We're now putting the guardrails in place to say, hang on a minute, you're not going to get away with it. So I don't think that, I think there's still the opportunity to put dignity at the forefront, even for those that seem established. Because we're seeing now where originally they were not willing to accept liability, to now where they're saying, well, acknowledging that these things are not fail-safe, they're not foolproof, please use them responsibly, and so on and so forth. It's kind of shifting the dial ever so slowly, but the shift is happening.
Yeah, thank you for that. If I can just add a little bit to that regarding my own area of work, it's somewhat similar to what Muduka is saying, but also I will move away a little bit from the fact that potentially the guardrails are there and they can help us to repair what's already damaged. In the area of work that I'm doing in terms of gender-based violence, the distribution of child sexual abuse materials, the cat has escaped the bag. It's out there. In fact, some people are not even aware that they are contributing to this problem. So if you think about, and that was why I was saying earlier, I didn't want to share any examples, because then I will also be part of that issue. You go online, you see people playing AI-generated clips of a 2-year-old dancing and gyrating as if they're 25. That's a big problem. And people say, oh no, but it doesn't look like my child, or his child. It's just a random face. And that's what UNICEF is saying. Even if the person, the child in that image cannot be directly identified or linked to some mom or dad somewhere, you are still perpetuating that problem. You're still saying it's okay for a 2-year-old to be placed in that role as if they're 30, as if they're 35. And so then I look at some of these things because they actually show up on some people's WhatsApp status image, and I'm like, wait a minute, if you have a 2-year-old or niece or whatever, would they dance like this? No. So why do you think that is okay? So yeah, I think we are playing catch up. I hope that we play hard enough so that we can catch up fast enough. And potentially from the other side, in terms of the systems and the institutions, I hope that they are listening so that they can at least also acknowledge the fact that we're trying as well to say no. Let's think about this differently. Let's think about the dignity of parents and children. Again, thinking specifically of my area of work, but also beyond that, just thinking about human dignity generally.
It's reminding me about how when the internet started, the idea was that no one had ownership of it. And
Exactly.
And that's essentially where we've ended up now, is trying to play catch-up of no one having ownership. You can't build that in later on. And then we've had social media, and then you can see what's happening now with this trying to build restrictions around social media, because there are good parts of it, but the bad parts seem to really outweigh it. And then I feel, now AI has arrived, I feel like we're faster on it, like we're still behind, but we're faster, and it was great to hear Taya today talking about the different legislation coming in. I mean, it remains about what's happening in New Zealand and where we're at in this space. But I think you cannot rely on the tech organisations to control themselves. Their monetary, their driver is money, and they are driven by that, and they are going to push that as far as they want, without values, without boundaries. If you've read the Facebook whistleblower, who's a Kiwi, that's a very fascinating story in itself. But it shows that they have no boundaries. They sit outside governments as well, so they see themselves as above government. And this is kind of what we're seeing happening internationally on the political stage, is that governments, that they're essentially trying to be above government, and they are, and they're not restricted because they're in globalised environments that don't sit under national law about what's happening. So we're in a very, precarious way, even though I was talking about being calm today, we're in a precarious way, but therefore as individuals, as communities, we need to keep the pressure on those people that are making the decisions in terms of governance, in terms of who's on the board table for some of these organisations, in terms of what governments are doing, and then internationally, how they're working collectively together. The Christchurch Call is a good example about New Zealand and France leading that conversation about the kind of content that's online and managing that through social media. So there are examples where this is starting to happen. The call is becoming broader, and we have to participate in that call. And we also have to participate, as you say, Jamoki, like we have to keep our eyes off this stuff. Like if we're in there and we're feeding into the algorithm, or we're sharing the things, then that produces the algorithm and more content gets produced in that way. So we have to be really mindful and intentional about what we're looking at, what we're sharing, what we're putting into HI and what we're putting in into AI. And then what we are actually looking at and seeing, and making sure that we are not also bleeding into the algorithm that's, going towards the negative, and instead is values based around what we're doing.
Right, I just quickly add my 2 cents. So in terms of dignity, I believe if I'm really coming back to that example, or the story, like the true story, we've seen every day is like migrants apply for jobs and hundreds of applications with literally no feedback, no human touch. That's a dignity issue. Think about those people. They spend each application. They generally spend at least half an hour to an hour to prepare, to submit it. At the end of the day, they face a cold, faceless machine with no feedback. Do you think that is a dignity issue for them? I think that is a real issue. And that's why we built this project, is because we feel like the system is sort of broken, and people deserve better dignity. Especially those young people, they're struggling, they lost, in the world of AI, the world of change, and geographical things. And I think that is how we build this system, is because we want to counterforce that thing. We want to give people feedback. Even, yes, we love to help them to get the yes, but in reality, you only get one yes out of thousands of applications, right? We can't guarantee you always get a yes, but at least we won't give them feedback. We want to give them dignity. We want to give them progression. That's the key thing, And job hunt, I know it's hard. It's like a full-time job. But at the end of the day, it's also part of their learning. And they need feedback. And that's how I feel there's much more we need to do as a small company, as a big company, as a tech company, to really kind of think about whatever product we're doing, it's always come from the other angle, not just about money, profit, user uptake. I think at the end of the day, when AGI come, I'm not sure you guys are familiar with this term, AGI. So the AI is going to be smarter than any human being on this planet. And who's going to save the humanity? When they control the weapon, you look at those drones, you look at those robots. When they control the nuclear, when they control the weapons, and they are smarter than any human on this planet, who are going to save us? I think that dignity issue can closely link it to, we should really start now to really make sure, the technology is using for good, not just for profit and money. I think that is my...
No, thank you. I think that's really kind of good. There's some really good insights, and I think obviously like Rochelle sort of said, like when you have that kind of issue of massive corporations with equivalent power to nation states, I think that's a really interesting thing. But also then this kind of undercurrent, more it's almost grassroots in a sense. That's sort of like actually alongside legislation. Like it feels like that's actually the actual direction of AI. In a sense that feels like kind of where that kind of point sort of landed for me at least. So yeah. So thank you. I'd like to thank the panel. Do we have any other final questions before we wrap up? Perfect. No, thank you all for your presentations and for the panel.
Thank you.
Cool. So I'd now like to invite up Nigel and Sue. So I think Nigel, you were wanting. Oh, just Nigel. Cool. I'll get Nigel to close us off.